This presentation talks about the emotional characteristics of gifted children. There are many variabilities, and different children, of course, show different personalities and different traits. But there are some patterns that have been shown to be true of gifted children. One is asynchronous development. What that basically means is that the different parts of your gifted child may not develop at the same rate. They may be 6 years old in age, have the brain of a 10-year-old, but the emotional control of a 2-year-old and the motor skills of a 4-year-old. They can develop at different rates. Other children may seem very mature, almost like miniature adults, and be very serious. But just in general, don't expect your gifted child's emotional maturity to match their intellectual maturity, or to necessarily either one of them to match their chronological age. One of the things we sometimes see with gifted children in particular is that some of them are very intense. They can be very dramatic or show a lot of emotion. Many children, gifted children, experience and display very intense emotional reactions that sometimes seem disproportionate to what's actually going on. They may include intense sadness or crying, intense anger, and heightened enthusiasm for anticipated events. As I said, they may seem very dramatic. They may express themselves in a very dramatic way or tell very dramatic stories. It's not quite known why they're so emotionally intense. There are some theories about it, but some gifted children are very intense or can experience emotion very intensely. They may not always show that in public, but sometimes you'll see that, particularly at home with parents. One thing that can also show up often is a low tolerance for frustration. Some gifted children can become very frustrated or angry or give up very easily if they encounter things that they cannot immediately master. Part of this may be just due to the fact that they have, for the majority of their life, things have come very easily to them, and they don't know what to do when things don't. Most children experience many failures as they grow up and they learn new skills, but gifted children have far fewer quote-unquote failure experiences, and so they do not always have the same emotional or practical coping skills to deal with them that other children may have who have experienced failure frequently in the past. So sometimes they don't know what to do, and that can be part of the reason why they either become frustrated or angry or give up easily. I always recommend with parents to build in some regular failure experiences in a safe environment. Learning new skills that aren't terribly important, like that don't necessarily go in their grade reports, like for example cooking or hula hooping, something that's likely to be challenging when they first start it, so you can keep track of and point out the fact to them that practice does improve their performance. You can also model with them how to cope with failures and disappointments and how to devise strategies to cope with it in the future. For example, boy, I'm really sad I burned that pancake. I am really disappointed, and it's okay to feel that way. Next time, the strategy I'm going to use is I'll read the instructions better and make sure to set the timer. That way you model for them it's okay to feel your emotions, to express them in a calm way, and then to come up with a plan for what to do with this situation. Another important thing is also to sometimes frame praise to make sure you emphasize effort as much as innate intelligence. Instead of saying, gosh, that happened because you were so smart, say, oh, that happened because you really practiced this time. And you can make that link with them that not every accomplishment is because you're just born smart. Sometimes you do have to work for them. You can also brainstorm with your children how to react the next time the situation arises once they've calmed down. Let them process their emotions and then teach them how to work with their emotions. But once they've calmed down, you can go through the intellectual process. What went wrong? What can we do differently next time? And model it for them, or you can treat it like a detective game or a science experiment. Detect what the problem was and then do a test out situation to figure out what some good solutions might be. In contrast to some of the dramatic behaviors I discussed before, some children go the opposite way and they intellectualize, meaning when something that happens in their life that you would expect an emotional reaction to, instead they seem to analyze it, they seem to step back from it, they ask questions, they can come off as being a little bit cold or even unfeeling. Like for example, instead of crying when a beloved family member dies or something, they may ask questions about what happened. They're often just probably trying to understand it. And that's sometimes how they deal with the world, is to try to understand it in an intellectual sense, to gather facts and information that can help them make decisions about how they should feel about things. Anxiety. Anxiety is a huge issue with some gifted children. Not all of them, but some of them are very self-confident. But some other children experience anxiety. Anxiety may be over their own performance, like perfectionism, which we'll discuss in a moment. It can also stem from worries about disasters, natural disasters, loss of loved ones, anything like that. And can also be over social acceptance, for example, shyness or fear of rejection. Many children experience this. It's not solely related to gifted children, but it is commonly experienced by some gifted children. The reason why can be partly because they do think, they analyze situations, as I mentioned before, and sometimes they have an innate ability to see or perceive or foresee things that might happen. Many professionals perceive a link between anxiety and your sense of whether or not, or your belief of whether or not you can control yourself and your environment. We worry mostly about things we cannot predict or control. If we can predict or control them, they seem to be less stressful for us. Gifted children often understand potential dangers and can foresee potential negative outcomes much more fully and at much more younger ages. Their brains see the dangers possible, but their emotions aren't evolved enough to cope with that fear and stress. And because they're children, they often don't have any real way of changing the world or changing the situation that they're in. And so that can cause anxiety. In particular, they often have vivid imaginations, and they can take a situation and see all the possible outcomes to it in a way that a child who may not be as intellectual may not do. So that's some of the reason why they can do that thinking. Some of the things you can do to help are providing a consistent routine. That way they feel like their lives are predictable. Calendars can be used just to both to set a routine and also to give a warning of big changes that might be coming up, like a trip or anything like that, or a surgery or something like that might be happening. Fears of the unknown or of common situations can also be reduced, as I said before, by practicing, modeling, or researching them in advance. Like if you're going to a new dentist, you can show them a picture that you found online of what the dentist's office looks like. You could visit it in advance. You could discuss and show what might happen. Keep it brief. If you go into too much depth, you can actually cause it to be more stressful. But just a brief explanation of this is what it's going to be like. So they have, again, some idea of what to expect, and it's predictable. Some children also engage in catastrophic thinking, which means you think of the worst possible outcome. Like if I get a B instead of an A, I can just kiss college goodbye. Some of the ways that there are many ways to deal with this, but cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the most useful approaches to dealing with this type of anxiety. It teaches more productive patterns of thought and can reduce self-criticism by forcing you to take your exaggerated or erroneous beliefs about things and fact-checking them, basically, to see if they really are logical and they really do stand up to the evidence of what they see around them. That could be one way of helping to create coping skills and more positive thinking patterns. Social anxiety. Because they are in the top 2% of learners their age, they are socially different from some of their peers, from many of their peers, in fact. They may have higher vocabularies. They may have more exotic interests, things that a lot of children their age are not interested in, or even adult type interests that can make friendships challenging. Other children may also not know how to deal with the fact that school comes so easily to them. You can model, again, appropriate responses to social situations, and even formal social skills training can also be useful for these things. Many gifted children, we talked about perfectionism before. Many gifted children experience or exhibit perfectionistic tendencies. They may waste time obsessing over trivial details of their performance or become very upset if their efforts don't match their sometimes absurdly high standards or ideals. Perfectionism can be seen as a form of anxiety. Again, you're trying to exert control over what over your performance. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be effective. One example would be, for example, if you count up the amount of time the child spends on perfecting things and point out that was 27 minutes you could have used to do something fun, and that in reality, other children who did not do the exact same perfect amount still got an A on the test. Choice and control is another way of helping with anxiety. Anxiety, as I said, is often linked to feeling powerless to control or predict things. So giving them some choice in an age-appropriate matters can sometimes help as well. Forced choices is a good way of presenting things. Like, for example, give them the choice of A, B, or C. Like, would you rather brush your teeth right after dinner or just before bedtime or somewhere in between? You set out options. You set out a series of options that you are all of which you're okay with, and then you let them choose which one of those happen. And that way they feel like they have some control over their own environment. And that can be a useful form of discipline, or a useful form of life management, basically. Cautions. Anxiety and frustration often underpin, in my professional opinion, are related to some of those extreme emotional reactions I discussed before. A lot of times, having a brain that understands some things, but not necessarily the skills to cope with those things, can react in a lot of anger, sadness, fright, fear, anxiety. To reduce those, it is important to bear in mind to treat children as children. Even though sometimes they can have conversations with you that seem like they are adults, they are still children. Their emotional coping skills may not be as advanced as their vocabulary or their grasp of things. Media announcements in particular, you need to be careful about what you expose them to, basically. Media announcements, news programs, so forth, and sometimes in online posts, they often exaggerate and dramatize events to try to get ratings, to try to get attention. And you want to make sure that your children know that. They may make things seem more serious than they are or scarier than they are in order to get attention. And if you explain to children that is part of what is going on, it's not necessarily as bad as it seems. And if children do worry about a social cause, it may be helpful to help them, to let them become involved in an appropriate supervised volunteer experience. That way they feel like they're actually taking a part in solving a problem. Finally, again, provide as much predictability or control as possible to help children manage their emotions. Teach emotional coping skills is important for all children. Keep your expectations realistic. They may think they know it all or act like a little adult, but of course they do not, and they are not an adult. And if your child is in true distress or displays